the last minute when I hit him last night. Robert Fatina, Robert Fatina. He is
Yes.
author, journalist, and activist working for peace and social justice. He is also author of the book Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Man, thank you for joining me, Robert. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Better that you are with me. The
Thank you.
reason why I brought you on because I was watching all of these events that were taking place in Israel. And one of the events had to do with Netanyahu in a criminal case. And what's fascinating about this is Netanyahu effectively asked, politely, I would imagine, Shin Bet to blow off his case, or at the very least postpone his case for several months, because he didn't necessarily want to testify on December 2nd in the corruption hearing. Well, they told him to kick rocks. He didn't necessarily like that all that much. And apparently, there is a feeling that he wants to get rid of the head of Shin Bet because the head of Shin Bet is not giving him the excuse necessary for him to avoid that trial. Can you explain what's going on with this? Give us some details on this. For one, what is he on trial for? Let's start there.
He's on trial for corruption and bribery. These are serious charges. He is accused of receiving gifts from everything from cigars and champagne to more extensive gifts from some U.S. Individuals in exchange for political favors. So this, of course, is bribery, is corruption, and he denies any wrongdoing, of course. But the evidence is fairly clear that he has done this, and now it's up to the courts to decide if, in fact, he is guilty of that. He's been able to delay his trial for a period of years, actually, due to the COVID pandemic, and then the genocide in Gaza, saying he has to focus on Israel's national security.
Right.
So he can't be concerned with his trial. But now the courts have said, no, it's time. You need to go on trial. And you recall that before the Israel started its current genocidal onslaught, that he was proposing a judicial overhaul, which was bringing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Israelis to the streets in protest. But this judicial overhaul would have enabled him to escape any charges. He would have been in control politically of the judiciary and could decide who and who would be charged and with what charges, and he would certainly excuse himself. But now the courts have said, no, it's time for you to go on trial. He wants to remove anyone who has made that decision, and we'll see how this plays out in the next several weeks.
What are your expectations with this? I mean, from my understanding, the prime minister can't necessarily be put in a cage while he's prime minister. I mean, that was part of the rationale for him to proceed and continue the war. In fact, I think there are two reasons. I think one, I think people are right that there's a political, need for him to stay in power, to stay in office, to try to avoid trial. I mean, part of his argument was, well, hey, I'm in the middle of a genocide. I can't take time off the genocide and go into trial. So there was that. The other part of it, I think it's this kind of seeing himself in historical terms. This idea of I'm creating greater Israel, and in 50 years they're going to look back and they're going to remember my name for creating greater Israel, using October 7th as a basis and a premise for it. But I do agree that part of this rationale is also, if I get out of office, I'm going to be prosecuted. And so I need to stay in office by hook or by crook. So any deal that come up, I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to have the U.S. to basically back me up diplomatically and politically, so I don't have to worry about any ceasefires, and I can keep this going. I guess my thing is, what is your take on this? Can a prime minister be prosecuted? I guess that's the first question.
Well, obviously he can be prosecuted because he is, according to Israeli law. He's up against charges and he has to face them. Whether or not he can be incarcerated upon conviction is another issue. But since he was very unpopular prior to the starting the October 7th genocide. He was, as I mentioned, the public was very much opposed to judicial overhaul. But at the present time, he is experiencing increased popularity because people in Israel are happy to see Palestinians being slaughtered. As you mentioned, it is sick. But he wants to be remembered as the person who has created the greater Israel, eliminated Palestine from the map, and that's what he is in the process of doing. And he's been doing it. Israel's been doing it for years with encroachments on the West Bank through the illegal settlements. But now he has the opportunity to slaughter or drive out all the Palestinians in Gaza, reoccupy Gaza, and then annex it. So this is the legacy he wants. So the two that he wants his legacy, as you mentioned, and he wants to stay out of prison, because even if he's convicted and can't be incarcerated during his administration, at some point there are going to be elections again. He's going to lose, and then he'll have to face justice.
Yeah, that's the sick part, right? That this is one of those things where the public actually agrees. I mean, you basically have a fascist state that says, yes, we approve of this. We don't like the judicial overhaul, but this, the killing of all of these Palestinians, that we do appreciate. There's a video clip where they spend about 5 minutes going through Gaza to show the level of destruction that's there.
Mhm.
And it's becoming clear at this point that A, they want to take the north of Gaza, meaning they want to just steal it, annex it, and occupy it. But they also want to annex the West Bank. And I would argue that was obvious going back several months based upon what they were doing, meaning they were leveling areas, they were taking territory, and they were using settlers as almost the tip of a spear to kill, maim, beat, and harass the people that were there. Seymour Hersh came out with this article in his Substack, and he effectively pointed out that Israel is trying to annex and will annex the West Bank, and will do so. His timeline said 2 weeks. Now, I don't necessarily know if this timeline is exactly accurate, but either way, it does follow with what they have been doing militarily almost as a policy. I mean, if you think about it, the starvation, the blowing up hospitals, the destroying infrastructure, well, you do that if you don't want people to be able to go back to a location where it's either to exterminate or expel. Same thing in West Bank, and for that matter, same thing in southern Lebanon, where they have been trying to basically exterminate the South, be able to take the South and occupy the South. Up to this point, Hezbollah has been fighting them, and they haven't necessarily been able to make a huge amount of progress. But give me your take on the taking of the West Bank. I mean, is this purely because Trump is coming into office, or they would have done this either way? Biden would have also accepted them doing this.
I think they would have done it either way. That although Trump, who approved their illegal annexation of the Golan Heights when he was president previously, has certainly given them a green light to proceed. But Israel has been slowly annexing the West Bank for decades. There are something like 800,000 illegal settlers living on Palestinian property, and Netanyahu has said not one of them will ever be required to leave. So that is de facto annexation. So the fact that he has, Biden has not been supportive at all of the Palestinians, but Trump has given Israel a complete green light to do whatever he wants.
Right.
So we're going to see, I think, whether it's the next 2 weeks or beyond that point, we're going to see Israel declare that that they're annexing the West Bank. One of his cabinet ministers said 2025 will be the year that the entirety of Palestine will be annexed. Now, Biden had an opportunity just yesterday in the United Nations Security Council to support a resolution ending a ceasefire, which would have showed some opposition to what Israel is doing. But instead, the United States vetoed that resolution. 14-1 was the vote.
Just to show this, I have the clip of it, and I want you to respond to, usually it's Linda Greenfield sitting there embarrassing America. This time around, it's this gentleman, and I want you to respond to what he's saying here. I find this to be utterly and completely detached from reality, and it bugs the hell out of me because of how detached from reality it is. This is the UN Security Council, the U.S. being the only country to vote against the resolution to end the war.
The United States also, over the course of the past year, has done more than any other country to take tangible steps to improve the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, even as the situation remains dire. We have also done more than anyone to work with the government of Israel in an effort to minimize civilian harm over the course of the conflict. The United States.
Is that true? Have we really done more than anyone to minimize harm and civilian casualties in this conflict. And keep in mind, he's saying that as he is voting against the ceasefire.
Additionally to that, the United States has sent hundreds of millions of dollars worth of additional weaponry to Israel since the genocide started. Now, the U.S. sends about $4 billion in weaponry and other aid to Israel every year. That was greatly increased since the genocide. It's been increased in weaponry. So these are weapons that are blowing people to bits. There are casualties in Palestine whose bodies will never be recovered because they're just they've been blown apart. The United States has asked Israel to allow more humanitarian aid in, but has done nothing to actually bring that aid in.
Right.
Several months ago, the U.S. built that dock to bring aid in, and what that was used for basically was an Israeli attack on Palestinians in that part of Gaza, and then of course the dock was dismantled. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent on that just to give Israel a launch pad for one of its attacks. The United States has done nothing to help the people of Palestine when it could have ended this genocide at any point in the last 13 months, simply by telling Israel no more money at all, no more diplomatic cover in the United Nations or anywhere else. You've got to stop this now. But instead, it has protected protected Israel in the United Nations with using its veto power, and has sent hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to Israel to slaughter the people of Palestine in Gaza. So what the UN representative, the United States representative to the UN, was saying was like atrocious and just lies of monstrous proportions. How he could say those with a straight face and expect anyone to believe what he has said is beyond me.
Yeah, it's astonishing. This is Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And it is hard to wrap your head around this level of destruction. Like there is nothing to go back to in this situation. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Gaza.
And over 2 million people live there. Their lives, every single person in the Gaza Strip, all 2 million plus, their lives have been completely uprooted, completely destroyed. The official death toll is about 44,000. That doesn't include at least 10,000 that are still buried under rubble. And the Lancet, the medical journal, has said that the more accurate total is probably 180,000. This is genocide. The United Nations has said it's genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, many social organizations, human rights organizations have said this is genocide. The United States denies it. Amnesty International spokesperson said, how is it that we, Amnesty International, have information the United States doesn't have that we can identify as genocide? So the hypocrisy that the United States shows in the United Nations and everywhere else is on full display.
It's not just hypocrisy, it's just outright lying. I mean, we are ignoring our own laws in this process. Like, it's maddening that this is taking place. And one of the other questions I have, if indeed they go with this notion of annexing the area, what happens to the residents of the area? Because the wild part about it, if you have a conversation with Israel, and they would say, well, we don't want a two-state solution. We don't want to live near these animals, these people. Okay. But then if you say, okay, well, one-state solution, they would say, well, that's not Israel anymore. And so it becomes, okay, well, what do you want? Like, what is a viable option that you're willing to accept in order to get past this particular thing? It sounds like the option they've accepted is extermination. Now, if they annex the West Bank, where do the people who are living in the West Bank currently go? And it's the same question for Gaza. If they annex elements of Gaza, where do those people go? Israel doesn't necessarily want them living in a greater Israel, especially from a standpoint of a one man, one vote. Wouldn't this be almost by definition an apartheid state in the way that they would have to operate it? Not just kind of de facto, but in earnest. Because otherwise, I don't know how you have this kind of restraint, this group of people living in your country that don't have the same rights that you do and still call yourself a democracy, especially in these areas.
the United States Israel proclaimed that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It's just political theater. That's all it is. It's just words that have no meaning. If the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are annexed, the Palestinians that are still alive in those areas will be second-class citizens in Israel. They will be subject to different laws, to different restrictions. They will not be able to, as it is in the West Bank now, they're not able to drive their cars the same roads.
Right. Right.
And the conditions they live in are very poor. That's what it will be until such time that they are either exterminated by the settlers, which, as you mentioned before, is happening in the West Bank now, or they are driven out. They're able to be accepted by other countries. But that's another issue. Like Egypt has said, it is not going to allow large numbers of Palestinians temporary residence because they know that it will not be temporary. So this is these are dire situations for the Palestinian people, and the world is letting it happen, and the United States is financing it happening. And under a Trump administration, things are only get worse, hard as it may be to imagine, for the people of Palestine.
I don't know how it would get worse. I mean, the reality of it is Joe Biden has given a blank check to any and everything Netanyahu has wanted. And he's grumbled every so often behind the scenes. But I got to be honest, I don't think the grumbling is legitimate. The grumbling is just kind of to appease a base. And the problem is, if you grumble for a year, nobody takes you seriously. And so it just became extraordinarily clear that whether it's the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail, the policy remains, meaning there's a real world physical matter reality that people are living through as a result of us paying over 70% for this war, meaning the rivers of blood that we're swimming through, we paid for the overwhelming majority of it. It is impossible for it to persist without either our money, our weapon systems, or for that matter, the political and diplomatic support that we use in the UN Security Council. I mean, if you remember, when the UN Security Council passed the resolution for a ceasefire, the US came out and effectively undercut the UN Security Council, said, well, this is a non-binding resolution. It doesn't matter. And people were like, well, the UN Security Council don't have non-binding resolutions. It's the Security Council. The US fundamentally undermined the UN Security Council in order to protect Israel with diplomatic cover. It's just astonishing. I have a question for you about inside Israel, though. I mean, I think the US is going with the idea that Israel is winning. And in alternative media, there's this argument that they are not winning, and not just not winning. They're still bogged down in Gaza. They're still fighting in the West Bank. They're still fighting in southern Lebanon and taking losses in southern Lebanon, significant losses, to the degree where there's a manpower shortage. Apparently 40% of the reservists either don't want to show up or don't show up. They've gotten to the point of trying to bring in the ultra-Orthodox. That is not going well at all, considering that this is part of Netanyahu's base. This is not something he wants, and they don't want to join and fight anyway. The economy has hit the skids, because if you think about it, Palestinians were working in those places. Well, that stopped. The Israeli soldiers that were working in those places, well, though they're soldiers there on the front lines, you have millions of people, or a million people, that are fundamentally left because they don't think it's safe anymore. And Netanyahu's war goal was, we want our people to be able to go back to the north, which there is no chance anytime soon of that happening. So if that is Israel right now, are they winning this? Like, how do you view this? Like, what is going on in Israel itself?
Well, within Israel itself, as you mentioned, there's chaos. The people of Israel know that they can't sleep peacefully at night. They don't know what's going to happen from as far as any kind of attack from Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, or Iran, and who knows who else might get involved.
Right.
So the people they know they're not safe there. That shouldn't give them confidence in what the government is doing. The military is taking losses despite its power and the backing of the United States. Morale is low, and the thing you mentioned that is most important to the Israeli government is the economy. They don't want their economy to be damaged, although it has been, because like the U.S. government leaders in Israel are only interested in power and profits. But and this is what Israel has is a trump card, if I could put that. The United States will always bail it out financially, militarily, diplomatically. And with Trump coming into office, that's going to accelerate. So while the uh, country, Israel, isn't winning, in fact, Israel's military leaders have said they've accomplished all they can accomplish in Gaza. There's no reason to be there in Gaza. They need to withdraw. But the political leaders are saying, no, we need to stay there.
Right.
Their goal to eliminate Hamas, which is that's like saying we're going to eliminate Republicans. Hamas is a political party, and it's an ideology. It's not going to be eliminated, but they're continuing despite what the military is telling them. In Lebanon, the political leaders in Israel have said they're going to use the same model they used in Gaza, which is massive destruction. But Lebanon isn't Gaza, despite the fact that Israel has destroyed some of Lebanon's military. There's still a lot left, and Lebanon has powerful allies that Israel doesn't really want to provoke, such as Iran. Now there has been back and forth bombing between Israel and Iran, but it hasn't become any full-fledged war yet. The United States is probably doing something to restrain Israel in that regard, because a war against Iran would not be limited only to the Middle East. It would bring in Russia and China in all likelihood, and would just erupt around the world. So even the warmongering U.S. government leaders don't want to risk that. However, Israel might push them to it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that goes into the conversation with Trump and the level of complication that Trump is about to come into. The first time around, Trump was able to have a policy of isolation from the standpoint of Iran and from the standpoint of North Korea. Not North Korea, I'm sorry. Let's stick with Iran, from the standpoint of Iran. In isolating Iran in that particular way, he was able to come up with the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia was on board. They were willing to ignore Palestine altogether and just kind of join hands with Israel on this while isolating Iran into the mix. That is not our world today. And Saudi Arabia is arm in arm with Iran. I mean, they just put out a statement effectively calling each other brothers, saying, we have no want for anybody to attack our brother. And Iran came out with the same thing. Basically, Sunni and Shia has been brought together, with each group saying the other is my brother. All right. On top of that, you have the situation with Iran being part of BRICS and being very close to China and Russia. Militarily with Russia, because they're going to have a security pact. And with China, China gets 90% of Iran's oil. So this is not the world that Donald Trump left. Not to mention, Israel in this particular context is a pariah state all across the world. So how does Trump engage in any kind of pressure campaign against Iran in an environment where Iran is not isolated and not alone? I don't know what that looks like. It just looks like chaos to me if he even tries.
It would be chaotic, but Donald Trump himself has demonstrated very little understanding of world politics and diplomacy, and the kinds of alliances and associations between countries that are ever changing, and certainly changed significantly since he was last in office. The cabinet he's assembling, which is just it would be I'd call it would be a circus, but there's nothing humorous about it or entertaining.
Yeah.
But they also see things in terms of black and white. Iran is bad, Russia's bad, Ukraine is good, Israel's good, Palestine's bad. No nuances anywhere, no understanding. If they would look at it, China brokered the agreement between Saudi Arabia, Iran just a couple of years ago. So that completely bypassed any U.S. diplomacy. It eased tensions in the Middle East, which is not in the U.S.'s interest, apparently.
Right.
So what Trump's going to do? He says he wants to drain the swamp and shake things up. He's going to shake things up, but it's going to be to the detriment of not only people in the Middle East and around the world, but in the United States as well. Any aggression towards Iran is going to erupt horrifically. Uh, we were talking about the Israeli economy, and one of the things that is to be mentioned is the shipping routes that have been disrupted mainly by Yemen. What's going to happen to shipping through the Middle East and through the Persian Gulf and so on if the United States starts aggressively attacking Iran? What's that going to do to availability of oil in other parts of the world, the price of oil, and so on? It's going to be you use the word chaos, and chaos is the right word, and it's Trump doesn't understand the situations. He has no interest in understanding them. He just wants what he feels his base thinks will support. He'll do it. So we're going to see him. I think he's going to approve any annexation of Palestine, which will bring a tremendous amount of opposition through the world from the world community. He may decide to either attack Iran or encourage Israel to do so. This is not going to be a conventional war. This is going to be, Iran is close to having a nuclear weapon. Whether it's trying to get one or not, we don't know. But if it does, and Israel attacks, Israel, of course, is a nuclear armed nation. And there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. If a nuclear war happens, it's going to be disastrous for the world. And with Donald Trump having nuclear codes, this is not bode well.
Do you put any validity into the reports that came out? This is Elon Musk was meeting behind the scenes with Iran.
Elon Musk has his hands everywhere, and because he's so wealthy, he can go into a number of areas. What he would be doing talking to Iran is I can't even imagine why Iran would want to talk to him or what he would propose to Iran. Now, Iran is more open. So they may say, well, this is a future U.S. government official wants to talk to us. Let's meet with him and see what he has to say.
Right.
But
who
knows?
Trump can do it behind the scenes. I mean, Elon can do it behind the scenes, meaning he's low level enough, but high level enough where it can be a kind of back channel communication, especially if Trump, somebody posed me, I think it was John Kiriakou, that it took Nixon to go to China. Oftentimes it takes a certain level of political credibility of being against something that allows you to reach across the aisle to be for something. So Bill Clinton, for example, can do NAFTA. Bill Clinton can get rid of welfare because those were Republican priorities. A Democrat was doing it. And so the Democrat was somewhat spared the ire that would typically be leveled at Republicans for that. Same thing with Nixon. He is a hardliner. And so the hardliner can make that trip in order to make a deal. Do you see anything like that with Trump? If indeed Trump comes in saying, I want to end wars, not start wars, and he does this thing of putting people like Gabbard, RFK, who are at the very least against wars when they're not against Arabs, and put these other hardliners in office, and yet sends Musk behind the scenes to have a conversation saying, hey, we want to bring this to some kind of resolution. Do you see that at all? I'm curious. Maybe I'm reaching, but
I think the examples you've given of Nixon in China, for example, no Democrat could have done that because they would be called soft on communism and all this other stuff. But he was able to do it.
Exactly.
If Musk is going to Iran on behalf of Trump, it's only going to be to threaten Iran, to say leave Israel alone, or we're going to carpet bomb Iran. It wouldn't be. Trump would not be. It's not his personality to say, we have some things you want, you have some things we want. Where can we meet in the middle? That's not Trump's style. Might makes right. He's going to be the head of the most powerful country in the world, and he's going to throw that power around. So if Musk is going to Iran, it's to issue threats and warnings, not for diplomatic purposes.
But I don't see how Iran is not a weak actor in this. That's what I mean. It's not a country that's isolated in this situation. For one, Israel has pissed off everybody.
Mhm.
And the Arab states might not necessarily be attacking, but clearly the populations in those states are inflamed. Saudi Arabia, Iran, China, Russia, India, all of these countries are under the auspices of BRICS.
Mhm.
And it's possible that if Donald Trump goes in and attacks Iran, Russia and Iran has a security agreement. So whatever deal Trump may make to get the United States out of this kind of thicket in Ukraine and to be, let's say, more to bring down hostilities with Russia, attacks on Iran are going to immediately increase those hostilities, not just with Russia, but also with China. I got to be honest, I am deeply concerned about the Middle East with Donald Trump in office. Like, for whatever potential of lessening hostilities with Russia, I get the sense that they're going to be elevated on the other end with China and Iran. It's like there's no way out. I mean, I could be wrong. Oh, before I let you go, one last question. How do you think this ends? Meaning, what do you think this looks like in the very end? Because there's no way Israel can say it's safer than it was on October 6th. And not just not safer than it was on October 6th. It is in a treacherous, dangerous world of its own making at this point. And if indeed they decide, okay, we're going to take the West Bank and we're going to take parts of Gaza, okay, there are people that live there. So, what, from your point of view, does this end up looking like when it finally comes to some resolution, some ceasefire, some endpoint? Because I don't get the sense that we can go back to a same old, same old. Like, I don't think Israel can kill 40,000 children and then say, okay, we're going to go back to the status quo. I don't think there is a status quo from here on out. But give me your thoughts on this. And this will be the last one.
I agree. It can't go back the way it was. The world is seeing Israel very differently than it saw it a year ago.
Right.
It's seeing it for its crimes. What the worst case scenario is that that Israel annexes the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Palestinians living there are second-class citizens under tremendous oppression. But the resistance has always been strong in Palestine, and annexation isn't going to end that. They will continue to resist. The people, Israelis, will continue to be unsafe in their homes,
Right.
and the world community will continue to advocate for Palestine, even if their governments don't. We've seen millions and millions of people marching in major cities around the world repeatedly in support of the Palestinians. These are people who are concerned with human rights and international law. They're not so much concerned with power and profits. So this is going to end anytime soon, unless, and this would be a miracle, there's a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders, and just as those borders might be, that's tough for another discussion.
I mean, I guess I'm sorry. I'm shaking my head because it's a unicorn. I mean, up to this point, it's been used as a fig leaf in order to justify further expansion. Hey, we're going to get the two-state solution, and they continue to still expropriate more land. Oh, we're going to work towards the two-state, and continue to expropriate more land. It's almost like the negotiations this time around were used to allow killing.
And negotiation, the United States is always saying two-state solution based on negotiations. Negotiations can only occur when each party has something the other wants that can only get by surrendering something it has. Israel takes whatever it wants from Palestine with complete impunity, so why would it negotiate? It says, I want this, I want your natural resources. Palestine says, no, you can't have them. Israel says, I'm taking them anyway. And the United States says, that's okay. So it can be no negotiations. International law is what must be adhered to.
There is no such thing as international law.
Unfortunately. Of course, Netanyahu has just, arrest warrant has just been issued for Netanyahu. That's big.
It is. No, I agree, but the United States has stopped the Hague Act. And that is for our own soldiers, but that's also for soldiers of allies, which means if in some weird situation that Netanyahu is locked up, and I agree with you, this is deeply humiliating for Netanyahu. We will use our military to attack The Hague in order to let him out of prison. Like, that is mind-blowing to think that we even passed a law like that. And, it's like we will attack the International Criminal Court, which just sounds horrendous.
It is horrendous.
But Robert, I have to let you go. Man, Thank you for this. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
this. And I definitely want to have you back. I appreciate your analysis on this. I was just curious on, what was taking place in Israel, and I wanted to get more details and more context for it. And you did a great job in doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to another visit.
Absolutely. Robert Fatina. He is an author, journalist, and activist working for peace and social justice. He is author of the new book, Settler Colonialism in Palestine and in Kashmir. Man, thank you for this.